Oh, Mike Hernandez was a bueno vaquero, rode some good horses, California style. I watched him for hours and he showed me a little of the old California he knew for a while. Started young horses in Bosal y Fiador, onto the Touraine, the old Spanish Spain. Brought them along with two hands that were gentle, some fine reining horses as ever were made. And he'd spin that pony hanging on to the riata. He hung from thereafter in the Willow Creek barn. And I watched and I wondered, man, how could it do that then? He changed direction and spin him some more round and round.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, daylight burners. How the hell are you? Happy Friday. Weekend is upon us and I've got a good show for you today. Mr. Scott Hall, who kind of a fan favorite, great storyteller, came back on to talk a little horse training with me, and it was a good one. I sure enjoyed talking to that guy. It's a little bit of a long one. It's about 2 hours long, but it was fun time. I didn't realize we went that long. I looked down at one point to see how close to an hour we were, and we were at like an hour 45 and still holding strong. So we gotta, guys like that, I gotta monitor myself so we don't end up with Joe Rogan length podcasts. But anyhow, before we get into it, we got a couple sponsors to tell you about. First off, we got Loma Livestock there in Loma, Colorado, located 1369 12 and a half Road, and they got a sale every Wednesday starting at 9 a.m. with cows and singles, followed by the feeders around 11. You can give them a call, 970-858-9988. Get your cattle consigned today if you're on the west slope of Colorado, eastern Utah, southwest Wyoming, that general area. Swing by, give them a look-see, sell your cattle there if you need to. They also got a couple production sales for Diamond Peak cattle going on there, the bull sales, bred heifer sales, that sort of thing. You can go on over to lomalivestock.com to check out their calendar, check out their market recap, all that good stuff. So thanks again, George, for sponsoring the show, and go check him out, lomalivestock.com. Next up, we got Ormiston Ranch and Turner Cattle. Brent Ormiston, Shiloh Turner, and Frankie Turner. Family ranch down there in southeast Colorado, over there by Pritchett, down in God's country. And Ormiston's been ranching for a long time there. They're south of Pritchett, and Shiloh and Frankie kind of grew up together, kind of almost not really high school sweethearts, but sweethearts from way back. And now they're married, got their little boy Cash, and not Cash, Rye Dean, and they're doing just an excellent job running cows down there. And Shiloh and Frankie got their own herd, looking to add on to the main herd of the Ormiston Ranch. And I'm really excited to see how things turn out for old Shiloh here in the future. So thanks again to Ormiston Ranch and Turner Cattle Company. And last but not least, we've got Rocky Mountain Mohair and Paige Lawrence, who makes some excellent handmade mohair cinches and breast collars. She is located out of Buffalo Creek, Colorado. She is 100% self-taught, and she must be just kind of a whiz at it, because she made me a cinch the other day, and it is really, really top-notch quality. Good quality mohair. Has a blue and brown pattern, really looks sharp, brass hardware, good stuff. And she's been at it about 3 years now, and finally decided to take the plunge and make a business out of it. So go check her out on Instagram at Rocky Mountain Mohair, Rocky Mountain Mohair on Facebook. You know, you need a custom cinch for somebody in your life or one for yourself. Check her out. Let her make something for you. She does a hell of a good job. So go check her out. Thanks, Paige. And let's get into the show, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Scott Hall.
Alright, well, welcome Daylight Burners. Coming back to the show is one of the fan favorites, Mr. Scott. How's life treating you, man?
Going pretty good. I was glad to see some cool weather down here in the sticks.
I bet it's still hotter and muggier and shit down there.
It finally cooled off. Last night it got down into the 20s, so that was nice to see.
Oh, wow.
And in the daytime it never got much over 45 yesterday.
That's probably kind of just miserable weather for folks down that area.
You know, I think there's a few people who were really bundled up and trying to stay warm, and of course there's a handful of people down here that aren't from here, and they love it. You know, they love it when it cools off.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine so.
I think a lot of the population in this area are retirees, and so they really enjoy being able to go fishing on this Lake Murray, and they really enjoy going and playing golf, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I find it pretty difficult to hang out in the 100 degrees where it's 90% humidity. That can be.
Oh,
that's brutal.
Yeah, that would just be miserable.
Yeah, it could be kind of tough, but I've made it through a year here so far. And anyway, I survived it. I didn't enjoy it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Anyway. See, I never had any humidity in my growing up. You know, if it got 25% humidity after half inch of rain, you know, the next day you were just about to melt. And but I dealt with the heat quite a bit, not that humidity. But anyhow, I was kind of wanting to talk to you about how you go about training horses. I've got this little yellow mare of mine, Lori. I bought her. I've had her just about a year now, and she was just kind of halfway, sort of halter broke when I bought her, and I put 10 rides on her, took her to the feedlot, and then I branded on her this spring, and she's really kind of coming around to a pretty nice little horse. I was riding her in like a little short shank snaffle, and then put her in a hackamore, and went back to the bit for a little bit when I didn't really have time to go ahead and really do some training on her when I had to get stuff done. So I put a bit in her mouth and went there, and then she got to where she was kind of wanting to fight that bit, and it slowed down enough to where I figured might as well just put her back in the hackamore and get her head right. And I think, a couple more months in the hackamore, I might try her in 2-rein. And that's not something I've ever done before, but I'm going to try it.
Okay. So, tell me a little bit more about your hackamore experience.
Well, I guess I really haven't used a hackamore much. We had like an old, it made out of like a lariat, with a nylon hanger on it, that we used for the first couple of rides until, you got to where their feet were underneath them, and then we pretty well just went to a snaffle bit, and then, from there into like a dog bone or, some sort of 3-piece broken mouthpiece, and then, eventually to like a high port with stiff cheeks. It'd be kind of what you go to back home anyways. You know, we're not quite as methodical and traditional as the buckaroo type. A lot of the same methods, you know, we just don't, you know, you don't see a whole lot of romels and you know, hair rope and braided hackamores as much back, you know, in the high plains area.
Uh-huh.
So, but I don't know. I've got to where, you know, it takes a little bit to getting a feel for that hackamore, but I got to where I really like it. You know, they once they finally give their nose, man, it's and then you can start putting their, you know, foot movement to where their head goes, and I really like it. It's but it's definitely a slower process than what I'm used to.
So, as far as the whole hackamore experience goes,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of told you how I got started into handling hackamore, and I was broke in hard and fast, you might say.
Yeah.
And, almost was the end of me. But that's, you know, that's on another podcast, and people can go listen to that if they like. But I'll tell you what it did for me, because the school of hard knocks seems to be how I learned the best. And I ended up, after I had decided that that's what I wanted to learn how to do, and I really liked traditions. I was around a guy when I was young who he purportedly was a traditional buckaroo, and he had a lot of the look. In later years, I kind of wonder how much real in-depth knowledge he had, and I wonder how good of a hand he ever was. But regardless of that, I know that he and my dad hung out together an awful lot. They both came from the same area, both raised on the reservation over in Fort Hall, Idaho. And the thing about my dad was, although he had spent a lot of time with Ray Hunt, actually, I think he attended 3 different clinics, and he and Ray they just got along terrific, you know, and Ray really liked his horsemanship and how he was doing things. And of course, Dad learned a lot, but the thing about my dad was he wasn't way into the traditions.
Yeah.
That didn't really hold a lot of weight with him. What held weight with him was whether or not something was helping the horse through his issues. And
okay.
So I didn't really get a lot of information out of him about a hackamore. But I had read that there was a book, and Dad gave me a book from Al Dunning called Reining. And I was reading this book on reining, and I would apply it, and I would read and apply and read and apply. And then I saw in Al's book that he referred back to The Hackamore by Ed Cannell. Or excuse me, Hackamore Reinsman by Ed Cannell. So I acquired that book, and I acquired Ray Hunt's book and Tom Dorrance's book at that time. But that was about all that there was out there as far as information. And I studied that stuff religiously. I read, you know, Ray Hunt's book a couple of times, and I read Tom's a couple of times, and did my best to get through the information. And I'd try to put the information with what I was doing. And I still was, until I got Ed Cannell's book read, I was still kind of wondering about the mysteries of the hackamore. And the more I read Ed's book, the more I understood that it was a bluff. And the more that I understood that, the more confidence I got in putting it on that horse. And I would work him from the ground, which, as you read that book, you find that he's a little rough on those horses on the ground. I did occasionally get a little rough with those horses when I was first learning, because I didn't know any better. But then I would watch a guy by the name of John Lyons. And John.
Okay, I know John Lyons. Oh, I don't know him personally, but I've watched several of his videos.
Okay, I had a set of videos by John that was forever long, and it was, you know, it was a real page turner for a movie. I mean, you couldn't wait to turn through the pages and get done because it was hard to watch and hard to sit there.
I think my dad had that. I think my dad had that same set of videos. It was like 8 or 10 VHS cassettes, I believe.
Yeah, that's the one.
There's a lot of good stuff in there if you could just sit through it.
Yeah.
There was no entertainment value at all in those.
No, I tried really hard to sit through those, and I tried really hard to understand and apply. And I was starting Colts for another guy by the name of Don Henderson, which he's probably, nobody may have ever heard of him except for his family and a few people in the small town of Downey, Idaho. But Don was a gifted horseman. I won't say talented. He was absolutely before his time. He could teach horses to do tricks without anybody showing him how. He taught his horses to run out into an arena, and he would lay down on the ground and play dead, and those horses would run up to him and lie down next to him and pretend to warm him up. And I think he said he had 2 of them that did that. But anyway,
that's crazy.
Don, he wasn't one of these to really worry about whether or not something was the cowboy way or this way or that way. It was all about, let's keep these horses quiet. Let's keep them friendly. Just ease them into everything. But on the other hand, he'd step out of the way and say, you do what you think, Scott. You do what you think. The way this all came about was I had a little blue roan mare that I told you the story about her bucking and what have you. Well, he had seen me show her, and he could tell that she was a handful, And so that's why he hired me, was because it was for a kid, pretty much training that little mare all by myself. That was quite an undertaking for me, but I was a guy who I put a lot of hours in, And I didn't care if she bucked me off. I wanted to have her ride someplace.
Yeah.
And she was punchy looking, She had, she was really quarter horse built, pretty fine boned, had a nice looking head, and she had that beautiful blue roan coat that everybody just goes gaga over because she had the white body and the black legs and the black face, black mane, blah, blah, blah. So that horse drew attention when I'd go show, and I had several people who wanted me to train horses for them, but they didn't want me to do it on a permanent situation. They just wanted me to do 1 or 2 here and there. But Don was offering, come to his place, start colts all the time, consistently.
Oh, okay.
And that was a way for me to get out of milking cows. So
there you go.
Heck yeah. And
we were talking earlier about milking cows. I said if you get somebody that does that consistently every day, you shake their hand and they'll make a full-time horseshoer. They'll make those hands look kind of puny.
You betcha. That's well, it's kind of consistent work, and I don't think people realize when you're milking a herd of cows how important cow psychology is to that whole situation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that, they just come in and deadhead into the gallery and they throw a milker on them and blah, blah, blah. And it's not that simple. There's a terrific amount of psychology in stock, in cows as there is in working horses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I just naturally gravitated towards. After I had been training on these horses for different people, I found that being quiet around cows and being calm and just my general demeanor being kind of low key, those cows naturally relaxed around me, and a lot of dairy people will tell you that is imperative to a herd of cows. Is you've got to have somebody who's quiet, doesn't, get abusive, doesn't get, if somebody has a personality that goes, really excitable to calm and then back to excitable to calm, that reduces the production in your dairy cows.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it affects cattle in a feed yard. You know, cows, they pay attention to that personality.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it can could be the same person on a different horse will make a world of difference too. I've noticed, and I try not to like I know if I'm gonna have a bunch of cattle to pull out of a certain pen, I get my broke column horses in there. That way I can get as many of them out as I need to without getting the whole bunch stirred up. And if you go plowing in there on a colt that you're still plow riding around on, whether it be in a snaffle bit or a hackamore, if you still got to two-hand rein them around and you're trying to get 5, 6, 10 head out of a pen one at a time, next thing you know, that whole pen's going to be running around, and be better off just to run them all out in the alley and sorting the ones off you want to pull. But if you can take something that's quiet and responsive, you can just bump them out, and it just makes the job that much easier.
You betcha. Those cattle, as soon as they get a little bit riled up, especially yearlings, as soon as they get wound up, man, the fight's on, because all they're focused on is you. They're not going to look for a gate if they're going, man, this guy looks like a wreck, or he looks like he's a bear. That's all they can focus on is you. So it makes it double tough to try to get him out that gate. Whereas a real quiet horse, as soon as they move a little bit towards the gate, release pressure, et cetera, pretty quick. You got your cow in the alleyway. Horse didn't get upset. You didn't get upset. The calf might have been sick, but he ain't going to lose much ground because he didn't ever get upset, And that doesn't always go that smooth, right? But
for the most part, it sure makes it a lot more likely anyways. And you got some that just, they're not going to look at a gate regardless, and you could put 4 people in the pen and still not get them out the gate except at the end of a rope, and those, so that, I always kind of give them like 3 shots to the gate, and if they're still wanting to turn back and run, then you shake out a loop and drag them on out the gate, and that also helps when you got a responsive horse, when you can go from cutting mode to line one out and slap it on them and then let's go.
Yeah.
But that's kind of cool, where you can really make a handy horse if you got in a feedlot, if you got an outfit that'll let you utilize a rope when you need to.
Mm-hmm. And it's not always very common. There's not a lot of feed yards that'll let you shake out a rope when you need to. And I don't know which ones to go to find that anymore.
I don't either, and but I know there's a lot of places that still do, but there's even more that just don't allow it because they've had too many dumb shits, for a lack of a better way to put it, is somebody that can barely rope a dummy wants to play cowboy, and they'll go slap a loop on a 1,100 pound steer and expect to get something done with it, and hurt themselves or their horse or somebody else or the cow, and then it ruins it for everybody else that knows how to use a rope and when to use a rope.
Yeah, and that's something too. I think roping in general. We see the team roping and ranch roping, and the list goes on, but I was raised in a situation where you dang sure kept quiet when you're in a branding track. You were quiet when you handled cows at all. And, the idea of running a cow down, that was only if you missed a couple of times, and then she figured out that this guy can't catch me. I'm out of here. But generally speaking, I found that calmness and quiet demeanor, you can get away with an awful lot before that cow even knows what's going on.
Absolutely.
Most yearlings, they're going to want to run and play, but when it comes to baby calves that aren't weaned yet, a lot of times you can sit there, throw a rope at them 3-4 times, but even if you miss, they go, oh, it's not a big deal. You know, they might jump and trot away, but you don't pursue them. You just kind of ease over there. And that makes it, as far as handling a hackamore, back to our handling a hackamore, when you're handling a hackamore horse, if you can keep things really quiet for him and keep quiet with your cows, you can get an awful lot done, because you don't got to be at a dead run, which, as you probably have figured out by now, once you get up into the higher gears, it can be pretty tough to utilize that hackamore in a way that you have complete control. So
yeah, it gets a little squirrely at times.
It does, and that's something that, you know, in a snaffle bit, you can really get a hold of a horse, and it can be the most aggressive bit that you'll put on a horse's face. And because of that, when a horse gets into a run, or if he's into a buck, a lot of times you can get him shut down. Whereas with a hackamore, if you go to trying to pull on a horse when he's bucking, you just might as well forget anything about what you've done, because you're gonna undo an awful lot.
Yeah.
You know, the best thing with a hackamore, if you can get to bouncing off of their face before they get their head buried, you'll be able to get them turned. You know, maybe talk out of it, but it's still a bad way to handle that hackamore, because it teaches them, when they get slapped on the side of the face with it, teaches them to throw their head in the air, which is just what we don't want. You know.
Yep.
But
yeah, that's exactly right.
I mean, that's why you try to keep everything nice and quiet, and you try to get through your rides without too much, you know, crazy kind of stuff happening. Because if you can get a calf roped, or you can get a cow sorted with a hackamore on a horse, then you've accomplished something. I see a lot of people leave a hackamore on a horse just long enough that they can get them into the next bit. But I have a tendency, like in the wintertime, I'll put that hackamore on a horse's face if it's slick, because then if he falls or whatever, he isn't going to break a set of rein chains or bend a bit or hurt his mouth. You know, so I've always taken them off in the wintertime. I guess I kind of got ahead of myself as far as my knowledge on handling a hackamore goes. I had a pretty good cow boss at the Spanish ranch who, he could see that I had spent some time working with colts, but he had a lot of ranker colts. I mean, a lot of stuff had been started by kids that didn't know what they were doing, didn't care about what they were doing. All they cared about was doing it the cowboy way, you know. And so he would give me a few of those colts that were pretty worried. You know, they had a serious issue with people. And the reason that they did is because they were scared. They were just plumb worried, you know. At first, I was throwing a snaffle bit on those horses. And after a time, I had figured out that I could take and do a lot of the John Lyons and Buck Brannaman stuff. I didn't mention that my dad at one point said, hey, look, this Buck Brannaman does stuff a lot like Ray. It's very, very similar, if not the same. And so I watched a lot of Buck stuff. And as a matter of fact, at the time, it was the only videos that Buck had out. And I watched them religiously. And I would apply what I learned on Buck's videos, and you'll see him work in a halter an awful lot. And I thought, you know, why not just do that groundwork with a hackamore instead of, I mean, that's basically what a hackamore is it's a tied halter, you know, so the hackamore is going to be just a little bit more aggressive. And I figured out the way around that is to have a really soft hackamore. And I did. My dad was the guy that most gear, as far as cowboy gear, it didn't have any real sentimental value to him. It was more of an inanimate object. So he had these old Bozels laying around. I shouldn't say laying around. He kept them hung up. He kind of took care of stuff, you know. So these hackamores, one of them was a wire core hackamore, which I don't know if folks understand hackamores, but an old traditional cable core hackamore was pretty darn aggressive.
Uh-huh.
There wasn't much limber to it. I mean, it was like a steel bar, right, with rawhide braided around it. And he gave me one of those, but it was shaped very much like the head of a horse, and it was actually fairly limber for a cable core. And then he gave me one that had a rawhide core that was, I think he said he figured right around 100 years old when he gave it to me. And that's been that's been 25 years ago. And he told me the story behind this old hackamore, and he says, old Ed, anyway, this old cowboy that they had been friends with for years and years and years, he said, this guy used it, and he said that was his favorite hackamore, and he said when the guy passed away, it went to him. And so he moved it on to me and said, oh, if you get a chance to use it, there it is. So I put it on a few horses, but I started learning really fast that ultra soft hackamores like that are really broke in, and they're just almost like rope. Those hackamores are only good for super sensitive horses. If they're not really sensitive and they need a little bit of bite to that hackamore, they're worthless. And so I had just those two hackamores for a long time, and then a guy come along that had another cable core, and I kind of thought it was a piece of junk at first, and then he handed it to me, and it was really soft cable. It was heavy, but it was as pliable as a poly rope. That's what it felt like, was poly rope except heavy. And so I started using that, and that was my good middle of the road hackamore, although it was, like I said, it was awful heavy. But I didn't mind, it kind of got me by, and I had gotten about 3 or 4 horses, so they were handling in the hackamore there on the Spanish ranch, which was about a half an accomplishment. And I'll tell you, we start talking about location and how people train horses. And working on the Spanish ranch, I didn't see a lot of guys come through that had much knowledge on training horses. They were just cowboys. Most of them had some kind of broken mouthed curb, so it would be like a three-piece curb bit. And
like a correction or something along those lines.
Sure, like a correction bit. I forget what the one's called. It's got a barrel in the middle and then swivels from the barrel in the center.
Oh, okay. Like a dog bone or a lifesaver or something along.
Yeah, we'll call it a dog bone, I think is the word. But keep in mind, I haven't been around those kind of bits literally for 18 years.
Okay.
I walked away from that whole, I called them gimmicks back in the day, but they're not gimmicks, they're bits that people have figured out to help them in certain situations, okay? So I'm not, we'll put it this way, I am not a racist person, period. So I have nothing against somebody that wants to train the way that their family did it for years, and I think that's fantastic if it works for them. But I wanted to be like my grandfather, who trained horses in the hackamore, and he learned from the Indians on the Fort Hall Reservation, and that's how he did things, and that's how I wanted to do it. I thought my grandpa was just the cat's meow, right?
Yep.
So it was kind of tragic that Dad didn't want to do what Grandpa did. He wanted to do his own thing, and that's, it worked for him. He liked to use the bitting method, which is what I call taking him from a snaffle to a tom thumb to a three-piece mouth, and then on up into a straight-up curved bit or even into a half-breed. That's whoever likes doing it that way, and it works for them. By all means, jump in with both feet. But the one thing I have to say is don't go middle of the road. You don't want to say, okay, I'm going to take him from a snaffle to a hackamore and then back to a snaffle, and then up to a broken mouth, all you're doing is you're hurting yourself because you're not dedicating the time that you need to learn how to handle that hackamore. And you're not saying, look, I am going to stay on this until I figure it out, and I'm gonna ruin a horse, or maybe two, or maybe three, but it's okay because while I'm ruining horses, I'm learning, you know.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm a little different than the general public, because I'm okay with experimenting and learning and failing. And because learning and failing is a lot better than just being successful all the time and never finding out what doesn't work. You know, and what happens, you get on a certain path and you go, okay, so I got it, good enough. I got it, good enough. And you're more of a, you know, a production facility than you are quality. You know, I like the quality that you can get out of a horse from a hackamore. And I also like knowing that I can take any horse, put him in a hackamore, and turn him into what I need him to be. We do it safely. We get the job done. No, I don't always bust out on a cow. When everybody else is running down a cow, I'm going to be jogging up in my hackamore and waiting to catch a set of heels, rather than being the guy that's trying to shut down a horse at a dead run in a hackamore and it's just a runaway. You just have to think a little bit more. But anyway, Matt, over time, applying the same principles that a lot of people apply to starting a horse in a snaffle bit, I would apply those same principles in the hackamore. But I did learn that there is one thing that you can do. I shouldn't say one thing. It's a series of exercises that you can do on a horse in a hackamore within a round corral that you don't want to have to mess with when you're outside. And working at a round corral is a very, very old vaquero tradition. I'm not sure if most people realize it, but that is probably the most solid foundation for training any kind of a horse that you can get. And so I would always go to the round corral and go to training those horses. Of course, I did it on foot first. I teach everything on foot. So that horse knew how to back up off the hackamore. He knew how to tuck his nose. He knew how to bend from side to side. And it all stems back from that Buck Brannaman horsemanship, you know. And I'd read Pat Pirelli too, and they were very similar. And I was into Pat Pirelli way back, like 20-some years ago. My dad bought me that book, and I read it inside and out, cover to cover, and I refer back to it all the time. So I was very much a student of horsemanship, and I just loved learning how to get those horses to do cool stuff, you know, like plant their ass in the dirt and turn a nice circle around themselves. You know, spinning a horse is very much a balancing act, and it's a lot of finesse. And the same thing with
absolutely.
Yeah. And I learned over time that, you know, this calmness that we talk about, you can get a lot more feel from a horse if you're nice and calm and relaxed than you can get if you're tensed up and you're worried, that horse feels that, obviously through the seat and down into his legs. And all these things go back to that psychology of, you know, stay calm and relax and keep that horse relaxed and, you know, learning frame of mind. And you can get a lot out of a horse with those ideas. Doesn't matter what's on his face, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny is, like, especially in the summer when the flies are everywhere, you see a fly land on a horse's withers and you can see him twitch. I mean, so if something that small is going to make him twitch, when you're tensed up into a ball of nerves, I mean, it's got to feel just like a pile of chains on him. Yeah. And they're because even the hardest mouthed horse is still very responsive to pressure. It's just it just depends on what type of pressure.
Right. And, I think that as we go along, there's a lot of people that they're saying, well, it's so important that people do things like, maybe they're a certified Pirelli trainer, or, this guy's been to 300 of Buck Brannaman's deals. If you don't have that real basis, and you don't have a real good idea of what generally horses need, you'll have a lot of trouble getting that good feel from a horse. And and I realize I've beat this horse to death, so to speak. Your calmness that you generate through your feel of a horse is probably the single most deciding factor on whether or not you're going to have success as a horseman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's what I have all of my life tried to achieve, is that quietness. And I found that I can get along with an awful lot of horses that other guys couldn't get along with. And I never really put a lot of weight into it. And especially when I was young, I didn't think it was all that big of a deal. I thought it was common knowledge that if you weren't quiet around horses and you weren't calm, then you were going to have difficulties, And as I left the Spanish ranch, I stayed in touch with those guys, and every horse in my string, people had trouble with after I left. And when I say trouble, I mean like King Kong was bucking guys off, and Merv kicked my buddy in the leg when he was shoeing him. I didn't have any trouble shoeing Merv. After a time, Merv would let me underneath him, and I could shoe his back feet, whereas before I was shoeing him, they would have to rope a hind leg on him and stretch him out, and that's how they could get under him to shoe him. So I had gotten him quiet enough that I could climb under there, shoe him, and he knew I wasn't going to hurt him, And when I would ride him, he was nice and quiet. As a matter of fact, he's one of my favorite horses when I left the Spanish ranch, but I found out, he was kind of a handful after that. He's one of those. Everybody rode him in a snaffle bit. Had quite a little bit of trouble with him. The boss put him in a hackamore and was riding him in a hackamore a little bit. And later on, I watched Scott put him in he tried to put him in the two-rein one day, and I believe it was the first time he had hung a bridle on Merv's face. And, Scott was a pretty quiet horseman. There were times, just like any other horseman, he would have maybe made some bad decisions on horses, and this is one of those times. He maybe made a bad decision about old Merv. Scott did as he hung a I want to say it was a half-breed mouth bit on that horse's face underneath his two-rein, and then Scott went to climb on him. And, that horse didn't waste any time. He decided to flip over.
Oh, shit.
And he was just trying to get away from that bit. There was nothing against Scott, but, boy, I'll tell you what, it only took just that one time, and I don't believe Scott ever tried to hang a bridle in that horse's face after that. And of course, me, I've been around my uncle and my aunt who were pretty damn good bridle horsemen, and of course, my dad was always like, you need to prepare a horse. You need to get him ready for this or ready for that. And so it was always in the back of my mind, let that horse tack that bridle for a week or two, and let him get so he knows it, and he knows the feel of it while he's moving, so that when you climb on his back, it's not brand new. Well, I don't remember ever seeing Scott do any of that. He might have, but I kind of doubt it, because I've been around a few horses that I hung spade bits in their face. And as long as they had tacked that for a while before, yeah, they might have a little bit of trouble, if it gets to bouncing around, or they might get their tongue out of place, or whatever. They get a little bit panicky. But, if they had already had it in their mouth a while, it wasn't as big a deal as what old Merv made of when Scott stepped on his back. I mean, he must have had an issue with that mouthpiece right away, and then over he came and smashed Scott underneath him, you know. We were out on the wagon, if I remember right. And I'm sure it probably kind of worried old Scott a little bit because it mashed his leg pretty good. I don't remember him saying if, you know, that's been a while back, but I don't remember him saying if he was laid up from that or not. But I do know that, you know, could have been his life on the line for forgetting to prepare that horse. And,
yeah.
That's
I've always kind of, I don't know where I kind of picked it up from too, but I always more from trial and error probably that yeah, like you said, you gotta prepare for stuff like that. And so like you know, if I got a bunch of stuff to do in the morning, I'm not gonna go grab a green colt that I know I'm gonna spend 5 minutes opening one gate and not get anything accomplished that day. So I don't know, it's same type of deal. I always, you know, when I throw the snaffle in their mouth, I always let them just kind of wander around in the round pen for a while and let them get used to it, and then just, you know, just let them walk. I've never had anything just go, you know, erupt into a fit of bucking when you do it, but you had some that would run around with their head straight up in the air, but eventually they kind of figure out what it is, and then, you know, like I said, then it's easier to get along with them once they figure out they've got a bit in their mouth.
Yeah. And there's some other little ideas too that really help those horses to not just accept the bit, but to like the bit. And you know, some of those ideas are contained. Well, I really encourage people to read, to stop, you know, just trying to figure things out on their own and do some reading on the subject. You'll find that in Ed Cannell's book, I think it was called Bits and Bitting, he talks about how they had a bridle bit that they would take and they'd put a rag on it that had been soaked in molasses, and then they would take a piece of copper wire and they would fix that rag so it would stay in place. And there was enough molasses on there and it would last long enough that acted as your sabors for the horse, which is your flavors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the copper is enjoyable to a horse as well as that, of course, the molasses.
Yeah.
And they'll get so that they'll actually open their mouth to take that bit instead of you having to force the side of their mouth to open their mouth for it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, those kind of things help an awful lot. Sweet iron's another thing that helps tremendously for a horse to enjoy those mouthpieces. I think that's pretty common knowledge. And there's the thing that's not common is sweet iron. It's iron that doesn't have any carbon in it. It's just kind of the raw iron. I think you can still buy it from steel mills once in a while. But if you can, that is the best kind of steel to build a mouthpiece for a bit. And, you know, I've talked about building bridle bits with a lot of guys, and believe it or not, there is more to the art than there is to the science. A lot of people would probably say I'm full of crap, but there's an awful lot of horses that will do well in several different bridle bits if you can give them the time to learn and understand that bridle bit. And if you can't stay calm and you can't get along with horses, the last thing you want to do is have an aggressive bridle bit in their mouth. Now, if you have a horse that 99% of the time he is calm and he is responsive and he's respectful, when you hang a bridle bit in his face, you'll know if it's something that you're going to be able to work with. And there was an awful lot of cowboys that I knew only owned 1 or 2 silver bits. And that was the bit they used on everything. And so they would have, you know, it might be a Mona Lisa mouth or a little half-breed mouth. as far as working in places in Nevada, I only came across one guy that had a spade bit, and the thing had blood on it. You know, he wasn't a spade bit man. He just had one. As far as guys who really were handy that I came across when I worked there, and it was uncommon to find a good horseman in the country I worked in. Now, I did eventually work for Tim Dufferina over in Denio, Nevada, and Tim was a pretty dang good horseman, and his brother was a good horseman. You know, these guys, they were spade bit men, and they knew what they were doing. But, man, it was years before I came across Tim. And I had worked clear up in Montana for like 3 years before I ever went south to Denio, Nevada, you know. So I actually found better horsemen in the state of Montana that were working on ranches than I did in Nevada the, you know, several years that I worked there. I'm not saying there weren't any. I won't say that. There was one guy that I knew was a spade bit man, and I was trying like heck to get a job with him, but he was not an easy man. He was not a quiet man. When it came to people, he was pretty aggressive and wasn't afraid to tune on a kid, you know. That man was Merv Takis. Merv Takis he was known to be an ornery old fart, you know. There was no two ways about it, but as I had talked to like Dave Weaver, Tom Hudson, people like that, they told me, they said, as far as spade bit man, he was probably the ultimate. He was one hellacious spade bit horse trainer. And they said you wouldn't see him tune on those horses. When it came time to train on a horse, you'd see him ride behind a hill, and then he'd come back and that horse would be handled pretty dang nice. Well, Tom, he said he watched him one time, and I'm not going to tell you what the secret was. It's one of those things that I don't feel at liberty to say right now. It's one of those secrets of tradition that we just don't talk about. But old Merv, he got seen by one guy training on that horse, and Tom knew right then, you know, don't ever speak about that stuff, because there's a reason why he rode behind the hill with all of his buckaroos holding roe deer on the other side. And there's things like that some people see it and they go, oh my gosh. But then there's the guys who go, now wait a minute, I guess that horse knew better.
Yeah.
Something that I learned over time too is it's different putting a horse in a hackamore that's been brought up in a snaffle bit and he's been quietly handled, and you've done your best to get him to where he needs to be, and you know when to make him Annie, and there's times when you don't need to worry about making him Annie. Those horses know the difference. And after a point, you have to say, all right, look, I gave you every chance. And that's where the general public doesn't understand. And they don't understand hackamore reinsmanship. Because at a certain point, you have to say, look, I'm not messing around. I'm serious.
Yep.
And if you don't take that step, especially in a hackamore, your life could be on the line.
Yeah.
And that's something my uncle kind of taught me too. He said, you know, we have certain tools that we use, not because we need them all the time. We might only need it for 15 minutes. But if you don't have that tool when you need it, then the fact that you don't have that tool is going to cause you more and more problems along the way. And you were telling me that you are starting to use a hackamore on your horses. I suggest everybody who wants to learn to handle a hackamore and wants to learn how to function on it daily, they need to own a hair hackamore. Because that hair hackamore, the purpose in it is so that if a horse gets to where he's getting heavy in the hackamore, a lot of times we think it's ourselves. And so what we do is we go, well, you know, he's getting heavy, Maybe I need to bump him a little harder. Well, if you bump a horse too hard on the face with a hackamore, he's going to throw his head up. So we don't want to bump him harder. We just want him to understand that you do this because if you don't, it's really uncomfortable. And that's why the hair hackamore. You say, okay, I'm going to wet this hair hackamore, and it's going to be like a little prickly pear cactus on your face. But if you push against it, it's going to push back, you know. And so it's a really important tool for getting those horses soft again.
Okay.
And that's something you'll want to pick up. You know, we talked about an ultra soft hackamore, but getting into a little bit stiffer, more aggressive hackamores, the general population of horses aren't real sensitive, especially if they've been handled in a regular web halter and not taught a lot of ground manners. So, you know,
that's true.
A guy is definitely going to want a little bit stiffer hackamore for those horses who are a little bit heavier on the end of the line, you know, on the end of the rope or whatever. So it's good to have, at least when you're starting out, you want to have that hair hackamore, and you sure want to know when to use it, because a horse might be heavy because of you. If he's heavy because you don't know when to release, then that's utilizing the hair hackamore in a way it wasn't intended to. Then you'll have to have the hair hackamore on him all the time, right? But if you can get softness from that horse with the traditional medium lay hackamore, you know, with a rawhide core, something like that, yeah, you've got the control that you need, but it's not so aggressive that it hurts his face. You know, it never was about pain. You know, the hackamore is about understanding. And so that's why we have to bump them away from it, because they understand that it's not constant pressure, and a horse doesn't know how to handle that pull and release. Whereas, you know, with a snaffle bit, if he pushes against the snaffle, eventually it hurts him. If he pushes against the boselle consistently, it doesn't hurt. It's just there. And so what you're doing is you're making it difficult or unhandy for him to push against it. So therefore, it's just a pull and release, or more of a bump even. But if it's so much of a bump that it's painful for him, now he wants to escape the pain, and he'll flip his head up, right?
Yeah.
So I have pretty much dominated this conversation once again, Matt. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I enjoy listening. This is kind of what I wanted to do, anyways. I like hearing about different styles of training horses, because I came into it pretty against my will, I guess. You know, I just got stuck on young horses, and looking back now, you know, I just turned 34 here the other day, and if I'd have been paying any sort of attention when I was 14, you know, I'd be a hell of a horseman by now, and my dad, like I said, we just kind of did the bit method and just, you know, bumped them to gradually a more severe bit the more finish they got, and that's still kind of my main method of what I fall back on. That's what I grew up on. That's what I'm comfortable with, and but it's the same type of principle with a hackamore. You know, you don't want to just throw a high port in their mouth and go to riding on them. You're going to get into a wreck. So you want to stay light in your hands, and at some point you've got to reach up and float their teeth if they're not listening. You know, it's you ask, and then eventually you're going to say, well, no, this is what we're doing, and of course you got to be a little more careful with the bit, because you don't want them to get too desensitized. You know, you want to desensitize them as far as their manners go, but you don't want to desensitize their mouth ever. And so I don't know. It's just it's and every horse is different. You got some that just take right off to it and no problem. They're always light. And then there's some where you kind of gotta saw in their mouth a little bit to get the point across. And it's always it's a different learning curve for every one of them. It seems like.
Yeah, I mean they're all individuals, right? Just like we are.
Yep.
And that's the case with every animal. I mean, they're all a fingerprint. They're all a different personality. Flowing from one personality to another is probably most people's downfall with horses, is because an awful lot of the public, when I say the public, I mean people who don't ride a variety of horses day after day. Most people are, they buy a house after they get hitched or whatever, and they settle down and they have a little piece of ground, or they buy a little piece of ground, and they go, I want a horse. And so they get themselves a horse, and now it's time to study up because they don't know what the hell to do with the horse. And so they have this one horse, and they play with him, and they play with him, and they start getting to know him, and they start riding, and pretty quick, they're like, okay, I want to learn more. Some people are like, okay, got it, good, I'm a horseman. And then there's the other people who are like, okay, this is more complicated than I thought. And so all of a sudden, they become a student of that horse. Now, I'm not going to say they become a student of the horse, because they really are far from being knowledgeable about horses, because they learn from that one horse. Maybe they go to a clinician, and this guy says, okay, do this, do that, do the other thing. And you watch him work with all these different horses. But the thing people miss is that they have a horse that's a certain way. And until they get with another horse or 2 or 10 or 100, they're not going to understand that, the reason your horse isn't operating the way that you think he should, number one, you don't have enough knowledge from the way a horse moves to teach him how to move. Another problem is you're dealing with a horse that maybe has some bad habits. Maybe he learned from somebody just like you that didn't know what he was doing, and now he's got really good at people training, which is pretty common in horses that are sold amongst the general populace. We as people, we tend to have just 1 or 2 because that's what we can afford. And that's the advantage of it. I mean, cowboys have the advantage of saying, okay, I really want to train up these young horses. And so you get a job with a cow outfit, and they go, okay, we got a pile of these young horses, and they run everything under you. They run the good colts, the bad colts, and the ugly colts, and man, you start understanding how every horse is a personality, and you've got to flow between those personalities. So, generally speaking, a horse's mind works with the same psychology, and if it doesn't, you can guarantee there's probably something messed up in that horse's head. Over the years, I've had a lot of people bring me horses that they had issues this way or that way, and only a handful of times did that general horse psychology not pay off. And those horses are definitely the exception to the rule. And you could pretty much go, well, maybe there's something a little deeper than what I'm seeing. Maybe this horse has honestly been abused, or maybe this horse has very seldom seen a human. If at all, there's things like that occur. And then it's going to be really important that you have a lot deeper understanding of the different personalities like you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's, and then there are just the occasional ones that there's just something wrong with that horse, and no matter what you do with them, it's just always going to be that way. So your best bet is, kick him down to to old Mexico now. You can't do it in the U.S. anymore, but that's the best spot for them because otherwise they're going to get somebody or themselves killed.
Right.
But
yes.
but those are pretty rare. I mean, that's a pretty rare case, but they do happen.
Yes, and that's something that, you know, as a person managing a feed yard or a person managing a ranch, you look at that situation and go, okay, is that horse worth somebody's life? Is he, you know, how bad do we need him?
Yep.
I had a little gelding that I got out of Colorado. The guy basically he didn't have enough money to pay me for riding one of his colts, and he wanted so bad to repay me, so he gave me this pretty good looking little round gelding. And I had been around this gelding a little bit and was able to pet on him and kind of, you know, I was kind of kind to him and he was pretty amicable. So I went ahead and shipped him to Idaho. And when I got up to Idaho, back to Buell, then I started working with this gelding. And I did the same thing I do with all horses. I worked him in the hackamore, and I could see that he'd never been in a hackamore, and the more I handled him in a hackamore, the softer he was getting, you know, and I didn't have a lot of time to spend on it. I was busy trying to run my little silversmithing business, and I kind of had another set of horses that I preferred to mess with because they were a nicer set of geldings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he apparently was some kind of a run and bred thing. Wasn't real good headed. I mean, didn't matter how much I fed him, I couldn't put any weight on him, so I figured he must have been some kind of running blood. And this little gelding, he was pretty owly acting, or standoffish, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe there was a possibility that he had been abused a bit. And, you know, I'm not saying that the guy I got him from abused him, but he had told me, he said, you know, when he first got the horse, apparently the horse was scared for his life. I mean, he said you could see it in his eyes that he was pretty concerned about the guy that owned him. And the guy that owned him, when he was selling him, pretty rough and tumble acting kind of cowboy, and he said he was pretty aggressive. And so that tells me, you know, 2 and 2 equals 4. He was probably beat on quite a bit. Wouldn't be surprised if he was roped quite a little bit to try to, you know, tip him over or whatever. That kind of thing's not uncommon. And so I wondered about this gelding, you know, and I kind of started him just like you would any other horse, even though I knew that he had been ridden. I went about starting him just like I would any other colt. And I used the same kind of methods that I had learned from Buck many, many years ago. And I could see the horse was coming around pretty good. And I was liking how it was going. But I did not have time to put miles on this critter. So I sent him to a kid down on one of the Simplot ranches.
Mm-hmm.
He threw a saddle on him and went to riding him. And he said he bucked around a little bit, but nothing so bad that you couldn't get along with him, you know. And he said he had kind of a tendency to run off. And the kid kind of fell in love with him because he said you could go a lot of miles on this horse, and he said he'd just keep it going, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out he was putting in some big old circles out there on the desert, there south of Bruno, and just loved this gelding. He would ride him every other day, putting in these circles. And I thought to myself, the kind of country that he's covering is big and it's hot, and he's moving a lot of country. I mean, we're talking 30-mile circles. Well, if that's the kind of country he's covering, and he's doing this kind of work every other day, that horse is staying sound, number one, which is pretty impressive. And number two, he's still going. And I called up the lady that I had been in contact with to find out how the horse was doing, and she said, well, you know, he still has his issues, but she said they're getting along okay, and he's riding the horse every other day. And I said, look, I've got this situation on my hands where I need to move to South Carolina. And I can't have 4 head of horses. Shoot, even having a couple head of horses is a pain in the butt when you can't be there to take care of them yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And so I said, look, I'm afraid that if this horse was mine, there'd be nothing I could do with him because I don't put in these kind of big circles anymore. I'm literally, I went from being a cowboy for a living to being a backyard horseman. And, which by the way is not suggested. That's like trying to, it's like trying to take a deer that's lived in the wild his whole life and put him in a 8x8 pen. I mean, it just doesn't work. So anyway,
yeah.
This kid got along with that horse well enough that I decided rather than bring him home and have to send him to the butcher, I'll just let him have him. So I gave him that gelding. And I've never heard anything since. I don't know how the horse is doing. I just know that while that kid was at Simplot, he just loved that gelding. Well, that's what you need when you're putting in those big circles. And that's the situation where you can utilize a horse that's got way more go and doesn't have a lot of other use, you know.
Yep.
So
those,
go ahead.
That's the best thing for those ones that just want to run off all the time. Well, let's go run off in the desert. Let's see how far you want to run. How bad do you really want to run? And you know what? When you get at the end of the 30-mile circle and they still want to run, well, then you might have something a little extra on your hands that you don't want to deal with. But
yeah.
But that's, yeah. So my dad always said sweat lubricates the brain. And that is true, the truest statement as I've ever heard when it comes to horses is that sweat lubricates everything on them. And the more sweat they got on them, the better horse they are in the long run.
Uh-huh. That's what I've always felt too. I always, when I was working for horse trainers, they'd have me lope circles in the barn.
Mm-hmm.
It always kind of bugged me that, you know, we got these horses that are originally bred to do a job. And, you know, some of the best horses in the world come off that old King Ranch. And one of the things that they bred those horses for was to use. It wasn't just to look at. It wasn't to ride around in circles in an arena. They bred them to use. And
that's exactly right.
These horses went to town and they won the horse shows, but they would go back home and they'd have to work a job.
Mm-hmm.
And still to this day, I feel like a job gets more done in a horse's brain than any amount of training because, you know, if you put a kid in a class and all he's learning is math, what is he learning about handling a piece of equipment? You know, what is that kid learning about hunting for mule deer? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have education and then we have education, and I feel like with horses it's the same way. If you're just training them in an arena and you're riding around there, you know, doing whatever exercises you got to do to get control of this body part or that body part, you know, I don't care if he'll run a straight line going down the middle of an arena before you slide stop him. What's he going to do when you're going down a slope at an angle and it gets slick? Well, yeah, a lot of people don't care about that. And they don't care if they educate that horse in that way. But I do, and I think it makes him a heck of a lot more gritty and useful in the long run. And so that's why for years and years people brought their horses to me to train, was because they knew that I was going to use them. And I think a lot of people figure that out. Some people don't. You know, some trainers never figure out the advantages of having a horse that can, you know, go out and do a job and then come back home and you can ride circles and use him. And, I mean, ride circles, train on him, slide stop him, side pass him, change leads, all that kind of thing. when a horse will handle really well outside and he's not leaning on a fence here and leaning on a fence there, you know, he has better control and better motor capabilities than any horse that's just loped circles his whole life. Now,
Oh, absolutely.
you know, I've seen some pretty phenomenal working cow horses, but that's, you know, generally speaking, those guys can go out and they can make a horse outside too. They're not just stuck in the arena. I had a friend of mine work for Teddy Robinson, and he said they would go work in feed yards quite a bit to get those horses out doing a job.
Yeah.
They didn't have mountains to climb. They didn't have, you know, deserts to cross and things like that. But hey, that work certainly pays off.
Oh, absolutely. I was, you know, I've been pretty fortunate my whole life to have some pretty wide open spots to ride, you know, even being in eastern Colorado where it's mostly private ground, but it's very rural, so, and a lot of open CRP type stuff. So you know, I only had to go down the road about a half mile and there was, you know, either a plowed field or 3 half sections in a row of CRP that I can just catch a long trot and you know, go put some quick miles on a horse and get them good and lathered up and ready to head back home and actually do some learning.
Yeah.
And then now, you know, here in Nevada, it's if you can't figure out a place to ride in Nevada, you are not trying hard enough.
That's for sure, huh?
Oh man, yeah, you've said it before, the big wide open or the big outside, I guess is what they call it. That's about right. I mean, it's 70-something% public land, and so if you don't know where to ride, you are really not looking at all.
Absolutely. Well, it's nice when you're training up those hackamore horses too, because you don't have to worry about hitting a fence if they're running off. You just let him run off until he kind of quiets down, and then you can start bumping him back a little bit here and a little bit there, and get it under control. You know.
Yeah, it's pretty cool seeing a lot of the similarities where I grew up as out here. But you know, like I said, there's a lot of farm ground back home, but those plowed fields are excellent if you got something that's just real froggy. Got a little kick to him. You know, we'd always pony him over to this plowed field, and it was deep sand. You know, you're talking like a good 18 inches of sand when they chiseled that field under. And so my dad would saddle up the old mule. He was just a little bitty fella. I mean, he's probably 800 pounds. And but you know, as a mule, it tend to do. They'll pull a barn over if you let them. And so we'd pony over there behind that mule, and I'd unclip that lead rope, and anything that wanted to buck, they'd only make it about 4 or 5 jumps maybe before they were just plumb played out in that sand. And then, you know, then it was let's go run. Or if they wanted to run off, well, we'd hit one corner of that half section, and then, you know, you'd kind of lean into their face and get them headed down the other property line, and then back across, and you know, they'd make about one of those perimeter runs, and they're done. They're ready to go to work now. They don't want to run very bad in that deep sand.
Yeah, it's nothing like having something to suck the juice out of them.
Oh yeah, that's of course when you're on some rocky stuff. I try not to let them open up too much if I can help it. But when we get in that sand, I know even if they really get to bucking, it ain't gonna hurt too bad when I hit the ground. So you can have your head in that sand. I don't care.
I used to train out in the sand dunes over to American Falls, Idaho. As you start heading towards Rupert, there's a bunch of sand dunes out there on that American Falls country. It might be called something else, just right between the two, going out along the river. So there's a nice set of sand dunes, and I kept my horses what they call Duck Point. There's a set of corrals right there, and I'd keep those horses in there. I was working for a gunsmith over in Aberdeen, Idaho. So
Okay.
keep me a few head of colts out there on that desert. I'd go out there every day. I'd climb one of those horses and take them to water instead of trying to pack water to them. I'd ride them down to water, so they got handled every day and rode every day. And then when it was time to start those colts, of course, I could go out on that sand, just like you're saying. And, you know, there's quite a bit of that country that was firm, too. It wasn't all soft. But it was nice when you had something that was cranky. Boy, you could go over that sand and work, or you know, if you had something that had a big motor on it. I started a few Morgan horses while I was over there. Those Morgans, boy, they got a lot of bottom now. And boy, they are tough. So when you needed to pull something down, you didn't have to go ride a circle for, 15 miles. You could just take them to the sand dunes and go play in the sand dunes, and pretty quick, boy, they were just laid back and quiet, enjoying themselves, trucking through that sand. And, I mean, you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to push them so hard that they pull a muscle, because as soon as he hurts himself, he's going to blame that on you,
Oh, so absolutely.
So you just kind of take it easy, and after they settle down a bit, it's just nice, sucks all that go out of them, and they just kind of pay attention to you. And it seems like you said, that lubricant gets to going up between their ears, and pretty quick they're thinking, hey, how can I make life a little easier on myself? Get all excited, I have to go in circles. If I just quiet down and walk, well, he'll leave me alone,
Yeah, and it's always little tricks like that. There's a lot of times the best way to teach them is to make them think it's their own idea. And I've always got, it's probably just a personality trait of mine that's gone awry, but I can't stand when they get to prancy going back to the barn. I don't care. They can walk as fast as they want to, as long as that head stays level. And they get to playing Mexican dancing horse on me, and then, well, if you want to get that fancy, we'll get fancy. So then we'll side pass to the barn, or we'll back up all the way to the barn, or we'll spin circles all the way to the barn, and pretty soon, the head comes down and their gait kind of levels out, and then you get some that just never get over it, I guess. But if they want to get real prancy, then we'll make life a little more difficult on them. And I got a little bit of pushback for using this term, but I don't really care. It was a good term that my good buddy, family friend, Doc Jones called it. He just said, "Well, we're torturing horses," and it really is. When you find something that bugs them, you kind of push that button until they get over it, and it kind of is almost like a torture method at times. But like if they get scared of a tarp or something, well, you just tarp the hell out of them, and until they get over it, until they figure out it's not going to kill them. And I don't know. That's kind of I've always liked that term, because it sounds cool, but it's there's a grain of truth to it, where you just kind of you're almost playing psychological games with them.
Well, I think being married to the lady that I've been married to for a lot of years has helped me to understand the power of words. And I'm not going to say that I agree with the verbiage of torturing a horse, because believe me, there was a time in my life when I felt like I tortured horses for a living. As a reining horse trainer, working for different reining horse trainers, I definitely felt like I was a horse torturer for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what drove me away from it, because I never felt like I was trying to get that horse with me. I just felt like I was ask all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just ask, it was tell.
Mm-hmm.
And just as much as it was tell, it was even more promise. You know, I promise you, you're going to do this, come hell or high water, or else you're going to hurt. And I never liked that. That really got under my skin. And when I had an opportunity, because of the trainer I worked for, he had a lot of connections. And I told him, I said, I can't afford to work for you. And he said, well, I can get you a job with so-and-so or so-and-so. And I know this lady, there's a lady in Texas, Carol Rose, I think it was. He knew her, and he told me he could give me a job with her. And which I don't know if you've heard of Matlock Rose. He was a cutting horse trainer in Texas.
I've heard of it, but
yeah, Matlock was very famous for his cutting horse training. I don't remember which horse he went to the world with. There might be some guys out there that are pretty concerned with remembering names and horses and all this kind of stuff. I remember certain horses because those are horses I've dealt with and I've trained, and I really enjoyed the way that they worked, like old Hollywood Dunnet horses. Man, I've had about 3 different Hollywood Dunnet horses that I've rode over the years and spent a lot of time training them. And they were fantastic horses. I didn't really appreciate the way they were short and low to the ground and they kind of crest them up. But on the other hand, with the right mare that was crossed on that stud, oh my gosh, they were nice horses. Stuff like that I found was pretty important to me, because then I didn't have to torture as much. Those horses were more apt to just want to try for you. And I also learned, you know, when you use that connotation that you're torturing a horse to get something, you also get it in the back of your mind that that's what you've got to do to get what it is you want. And I really feel like when, you know, years ago, I remember hearing this term an awful lot. It would be make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. And that's definitely the wrong way to look at it. It should be make the wrong thing difficult, but more so make the right thing easy. And keep trying to find ways to make the right thing easy and forget about making the wrong thing difficult. If you keep trying to make the right thing easy, you won't have to worry about making the wrong thing difficult, because there's no time to worry about making the wrong thing difficult. You know? Yeah. Yes, you can. You can say, okay, I'm going to torture this horse for doing the wrong thing. But what I've done is I said, okay, how can I utilize this energy in the right way? And so here's a thought. When those horses start to prance and home and they start wanting to really move out towards home, I like to treat it kind of like a spring. I'll say, okay, you want to head towards home? Well, then we'll head towards home. But first, I want you to face away from home for just a minute. And then I'd roll them back towards home. And it was a way of getting my horses to really roll them back nice. And really light, too. And so I would consistently, the closer I got to home, the more I would kind of work on handling, like you're talking about. If he wants to go towards home, let's back up towards home. Not necessarily torturing him, you're just using his energy, right? Yeah. Finally,
and go ahead.
I was going to say, finally, you're going to get home, but if you get home and you say, okay, I'm done, well, then the horse got what he was after, right?
Yep.
And so something I was taught years ago, I mean, we're talking when I was 10 years old, my uncle taught me this, and he still goes over this lesson with me, I don't know, once a year at least, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And Kenny always says, you know, your grandpa used to ride those horses towards home, and they'd really have their energy up. And he'd get them walking just as fast as he could get them walking, and then he'd ride on by. And he'd keep going another half a mile, and then he'd turn around and go back towards the house. And of course, that energy of the horse would really come up when he's heading towards home. So he would bring the life up in his body. He didn't fight the horse home. He just knew once he got home, he was going to go on by. And he would keep doing that until the horse stopped having the energy that he would carry as he was coming towards the house. And so, I mean, I just did this lesson with the horses when I was in Idaho. My little gelding was really herd bound. And so he wasn't drawn to home, he was drawn to those other horses. And so, knowing that these other two horses were pretty old, I said, okay, we'll go to these other horses, but you're going to go as fast a walk as I can get you to walk. And if you break into a jog, well, then I'm going to pick up on the hackamore, and I'm going to make you bend your body, and you're going to have to keep your body bent until you bring that life back down. And he brought his life down enough to walk. And I would, like you said, I'd let him walk as fast as he could possibly walk towards them other horses. But then the key was once he got there. Now, if I would have just went on by and went the other way, now I'd lose the energy, and he would feel like it was a negative thing because I'm tuning on him and I'm training on him away from those other horses. So what I would do is I would let him walk as fast as he wanted to walk back to him. And once he got to him, that's when I would start, and I wouldn't say that I was torturing him. All I was doing is saying, look, we are going to do something as long as we're here. I don't care if you just jog circles around those other horses. I don't care if you lope circles, but whatever we do, we're going to use that energy. And so as soon as he'd get to these other horses, I'd start doing something. And then as soon as he would kind of veer away, because I'd let him stay there, and he wanted to be with these other two horses, I would let that draw control his face. Does that make sense? This is another thing you can do in a hackamore. So if a horse always wants to turn a certain way towards them other horses, you can ride him kind of away from them other horses, and then to get him lighter on that hackamore, you just gently, with just the slightest pressure, you maybe won't even have to pick up on the hackamore. Just pick up on the rein, real gentle, and you'll see that horse kind of tilts towards them other horses. And you want to use that every chance you got, right? Well, as soon as he'd start to leave those other horses, I'd quiet down and I'd actually sit down and say, whoa. And I wouldn't let him leave those other horses. I'd take him back and make him work a little bit more. And then when he started to leave those other horses, even if it was on accident, well, I'd leave him alone. Right? And a lot of people think that you need to pet on a horse. That's not a reward for a horse. I mean, they enjoy it, but it's more of a distraction. If you just leave a horse alone, and I mean leave him completely alone, you let your body die, you just kind of stop doing anything, that's really a big reward for a horse. So as soon as that gelding would start to move away from those other horses, even the slightest bit, he might only go 3 or 4 steps at first. Well, I'd quit riding and just sit there quiet. And then, pretty quick, if he started acting like he was pulling towards him at all, I'd bring up the energy in my life and I'd really kind of move my legs and get busy. But I'm sure careful about the mentality that I'm in. Am I in the mentality of I'm enjoying this, I'm having a good time, or am I in the mentality that I'm a trainer and I'm training this horse? Well, I'll tell you what, the worst thing I feel like a guy can do is say, I'm a horseman, I'm training horses. Because then your attitude is more, hey, I know what the hell I'm doing. And it doesn't matter. I'm going to do this my way. And it doesn't matter what this horse is doing. I'm going to fix that, I'm going to fix his wagon. But, well, I'll tell you what, it's sure nice when you turn a horse out and you go to catch him and he doesn't run. And he kind of appreciates you as a person. And that's something my dad did teach me over the years. his horses all would run to him in a pasture. And I've remembered that ever since I was a little kid. Here was a guy who he could go out in the pasture, and his old horse would run up to him. And I remember a gelding he had. I don't know how old Barney was, but he was a big white Appaloosa horse. Pretty well built for an Appaloosa. And I remember him having a mane and tail, not the common Appaloosas, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd climb on this old white horse. This is before it was cool. This was before anybody else was doing it. I watched him mount up on that horse with nothing on. So there was no bridle. There was no rope around his neck. And he'd go out and run in the other horses on that horse. And I remember one day he got those horses into the kind of the alleyway between the arena and the round corral. And he grabbed a rope off of the truck as he rode by. And he shook out a loop. And there was a gelding in particular that he wanted. And he rode up at a dead run on that white horse with nothing on him. And he roped that other horse. And I'll never forget that, I don't think, as long as I live. That was before you ever started seeing that stuff on the internet. It was before you ever saw the competitions with bridleless horsemanship.
Mm-hmm.
This had to be 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was just a little guy. And man, it's burned in my memory. I'm like, holy crap, that man's a horseman, you know?
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
That's all stuff that he came up with on his own. And years later, I wanted to get horses so that I could ride them bridleless, you know. And I got, I guess about 3 or 4 head that I've been able to train as far as bridleless goes. One of them, my old friend Erin Martinez, you know Erin.
Oh, yeah.
She was pretty shocked to hear that I had a gelding that if you didn't really know what you were doing, you couldn't get him to do much. And she thought he was pretty heavy, and I said, you'd be pretty surprised. I said, I can get a job done on him without a bridle on. And she's like, no way. I said, yeah. I said, it's kind of in how you ask. That goes back to that secret of old Nose Takis, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I kind of built a relationship with that old gelding that she would take out on the desert, you know, and he and I had an agreement, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I would venture to say that there was some torture in that poor old horse's life, because if you were just nice to him and if you just let him be the way he liked to be, he was a heavy old draft horse acting sucker. I mean,
yeah,
he was dense, and he didn't like to work. Oh, the big horse likes to work, but I mean, there might be a few that really, really like to work a cow, but this old gelding, he didn't like to do a job if you didn't make him do it. And so we'd have ourselves an attitude adjustment, and I guarantee you now, after he and I had a little discussion, he knew who was riding him. That if I put anybody else on him, he was just the old gray dog, you know.
Yeah, just a deadhead, huh?
Bad. Really bad.
Yeah. I know horses like that, and I've got a really nice mare that you can go do whatever you want on her. I mean, you know, she doesn't really like the head side in the arena. She doesn't like that head box very well, but she'll get in there if you make her. And but you could heel on her all day long. You could rope calves. You can go make a big circle on her, and she's got like a real fancy type of long trot, you know, just real quick moving, but just steps on out. And then you can go put a little kid on her, and she's just like a Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, you know, just a whole bother. And just dumbs it way down for whoever, you know, if you got somebody new on. And it's really cool because you can just see her head just drop. And she just plods around like she's got lead weights on. And it's just, you know, perfect for the kids. And she's just, it's just amazing how that attitude is with her. But she's a pretty special horse. You don't find those every day.
No, they are uncommon. This old gray horse of mine, he was like that, just quiet with kids, and he understood, if the person that was riding him knew what they were doing, then of course they could get him to do quite a bit. And I'm not saying Erin didn't know what she was doing. She just wasn't asking the right questions. And, I had started that gelding. He and I had a relationship that was probably 10 years long. And because of that relationship, he knew what I was asking. And there was no doubt in his mind when I told him to do something, that's what we were going to do. And I don't know that he always enjoyed what he was doing, but when I was with him, he acted like he did, There was some pretty cool stuff that occurred on that gray horse. There was one day I was riding him bridleless. I had a piece of baler twine around his neck because I figured out that, his feel when it came to stopping without a bridle was pretty numb. And he liked to really drift down into a stop. He didn't like to just stop. And so I would put that piece of baling twine on there if I knew that I was going to be out a little bit, because if I pulled on his mane, I couldn't get him convinced. But if I had a little bit of a baler twine string around his lower neck, well, then I could convince him. Well, there was this bull calf that kept climbing out of the feed yard, and I had a gate between two haystacks. The haystack set at a 90-degree angle away from the gate, and so I decided, okay, just kind of funnel him right into that corner, and that bull could see that gate was open. And I could see him kind of thinking about going in there, and I thought, this will be pretty easy, no big deal. And that bull calf, of course, he's grain fed, and he's feeling pretty uppity, and he swaps ends and runs the other way from that gate. And I was like, you asshole. It's on, so old Zorro put his head down, he went after that calf. And he beat him to the end of the haystack. And he stopped and slid around. It's all icy and muddy, And I'm thinking to myself, hey, my ass is still on top of him. And that calf runs the other way, like I said, because these stacks sit at a 90-degree angle away from each other. And so now the calf was running towards the end of the other haystack. And he beats into the other one. And then the calf swaps in and goes towards the other haystack. And this gelding beats into the other one. So far, I've never had to pick up on him whatsoever. He turned that calf, I'm not kidding you, about 6 times before he got him to head back to that gate. All on his own. Poor Erin Martinez, she'd have fainted dead away if she knew that was the horse I got.
But she's probably cussing you right now. Ears are burning.
I was just excited that I had my ass on the back of that horse when that happened, because, he knew what I wanted, and I did have to guide him a little bit here and there, but for the most part, there was nothing on that horse. I was bareback, there was no bridle, there was just a little baler twine string around his neck, and there was a time or two I tried to get him to shut down and turn just a little bit sooner than what he did. And I tried to get him to roll over his hocks, and he wasn't that guy. He wasn't, I'll pivot on my foot just right and do the windshield washer turn. No, he would just bend however he felt like bending, because I couldn't tell him otherwise. He'd just run down, and when that calf would stop and turn, well, he'd stop, and he'd kind of wallow through his turns, but he kept beating that calf. That's all that mattered.
Yep. Yeah, those type of situations, style points don't count for shit. So as long as it's done, it's done.
That's right. We got that little bull calf put in, and it was over, and we went to get us a drink of water. And it's been a day or two since I had that fun on that horse, but now he's off to another home, and now he's taking care of a kid, raising her up and teaching her the ways of a horse, you know.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's always nice when they get so they listen to you well enough. It doesn't really matter what's on their face.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's nice. And those type of deals, they don't happen overnight. That takes a lot of time on a horse.
Yeah, I think at that point I had been riding that horse for about 9 or 10 years anyway. So quite a while.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He was a pretty handy old stock horse.
Yeah, that's kind of the way my Clara there is. I've had her for I think 6 years now, and she's just getting better. She's I think she's 11 this year, so she's got plenty of miles left in her, and you know she's always stayed sound, and she's about the easiest keeper you'll ever. I think you could keep her on a straight water diet, and she'd still somehow manage to gain weight.
Oh, those are the kind to have, huh?
Oh man, I just brought her back to the yard here about a week ago, and I was telling somebody she looks like one of those bodybuilders that just have no neck, because there's no definition right now from where her neck joins up with her shoulders. It's just kind of a blob that leads into her head, and she's you know, it's not like I was overfeeding her. She's an easy keeper.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was just over to my dad's place the other day, and I wanted to go for a horseback ride. Of course, actually the one horse he's had since I just barely graduated high school. So that horse has got to be 27, 28 years old, maybe a little older even.
Mm-hmm.
His other Gilda is an old stock horse of mine from way back when I worked in Montana. He's a horse I traded for. And the old horse is still sound, but he's old enough that he doesn't need to work anymore, you know, getting some arthritis. It might even be a little bit navicular, you know. So I was like, I ain't going to ride any one of those. So he had this gelding that a friend of his sent over to him to feed him through the winter. And this horse is probably only about maybe 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And obese. I mean, this horse is rolling in fat. He's fat around the tail head. He's got this big old pot belly, and then he's got this really thick, cressy neck. You know how they get so fat on their neck that it looks almost like an old Roman horse? And they get the little fat folds in their neck. Yeah, he's got guy. That's how fat he is.
Oh, man.
So it's like, you look like you could use a mile or two, you know. He's so fat that he's built like a 55-gallon drum, you know. So
your legs hurt when you get done.
Pert mirror. Oh my God. Just rolling in fat. And I was like, yep, we're going for a ride. So I took this building up the hill. He's one of those Hollywood bred horses too.
Oh, okay.
Even as heavy as he was, man, he was handy and just soft. You know, I started playing with him a little bit just because it's natural for me to ask a question here and ask a question there and see what they know and kind of figure things out. And so we played around for, I guess, a couple of 3 hours up in the sagebrush and on the hillsides, you know, to see what he was. And once again, I just fell in love with that strain of quarter horses again. I mean, super handy, big enough to get a job done, you know, and super easy keeper. Probably the most important thing of all.
Yeah.
Yep.
You take them out for a run and you can just hear the bacon sizzling off of them.
That's for damn sure.
That's why I was talking so much shit on my Clara mare when I was riding her the other day. She hadn't been her feet are super long. I was waiting on the farrier to get here, so I haven't been riding her hard, just kind of keeping her reminded that we got a job to do. And but I don't want her getting real sore. But I just the whole time I was riding her, I was like, you are so fat. And, just talking all sorts of shit on her. I'm surprised she hasn't unloaded me on my head yet, but it just goes to show the temper. And for a mare even, she's just a good, best horse I've ever owned. She's one of those ones you're not going to find them. There ain't very many of them out there.
Yeah, it's something, as much as we've bred these horses up to be nice horses, there's still to this day a really good kid horse or a horse you can throw anybody on. They're uncommon and they're highly valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can tell those ones on real early once, and it may not be within the first 30 days or so, but once that you first really get to riding them, you can always tell those ones are like, there's something about this one that, and because they just don't come around very often, and, my wife will always ask me on some of the client horses I have or a new one that I think they're going to be pretty cool, or that's just a horse. And then more often than not, it's like, that's just a horse. And you can get a job done on them. It can be all right, but they're just a horse. Nothing you're going to tell a bunch of stories about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's those kind of horses that make the world turn.
Yep.
That's the kind of horses that, a lot of guys, they kind of get used to that. And then when you find one that's super gentle, you almost don't appreciate it because you're like, man, he's just kind of a deadhead. But for the rest of the world, that's what they need.
Yep.
Us as cowboys, we need something that's, it's going to push us to work on our horsemanship because we got to get a little bit more out of a horse that doesn't want to do the job. And then pretty quick, you're making cow horses out of that shitter that you pulled out of the killer pen,
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes cowboys a lot of times. They have a lot of feel for a horse where, maybe they never were working for a horse trainer, but their natural feel is built around, hey, I got to get a job done. And this horse is just, typical run-of-the-mill, average kind of gelding or average kind of mare. And man, I got to get this job done. And so pretty quick, you're like, okay, how can I get him to do this? How can I get him to do that?
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes better horsemen than anything. It's just those run-of-the-mill horses that never would have amounted to much, but by then they got to make a horse because you got a job to do.
Yep. And I was telling an episode the other day, if I do enjoy riding a green horse because it teaches you how to handle cattle gently, because you've got to have a lot of space between your horse and that animal to work with, because you don't have a whole lot of steering built up in your horse. So you can't just plant and change directions real quick. It's usually about a 30-yard process to get them slowed down, stopped, kind of cranked over to the other general direction, and then they usually get going back the other way pretty quick. But it's not a stop, plant, turn the other way. So you've got to stay quite a ways back from that animal so they don't beat you, and it teaches you how to turn a cow back with just a step here, step there, or movement of your hand or something, and you learn how to handle your animals, gently, quietly.
Certainly.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it kind of ties it all together. You can't really be a cattleman without being a horseman. If you're using horses. I guess there's folks that use four-wheelers, but we don't like those folks anyways.
I had a guy that I worked with at a feed yard over the Scars feed yard in kind of North Idaho Falls there, and it was one of the Badcocks from over in Arco, Idaho, and those guys are ranchers over that way, horsemen. I don't know what kind of horsemen the older men were, but gosh, what is Brent's brother's name? Can't think of his name off the top of my head. But anyway, he trains horses over there in the Arco area. Pretty good little horseman. And so when I met this guy at Scars, I thought he was going to be quite a horseman, you know. And he was an all right horseman. His horses were just quiet and just average. But this man's psychology in cattle was probably the most in-depth of anybody I've been around. We talked cow psychology like every time we were alone. We started talking about, okay, you know, when you ride into a pen of cattle, is it easier to ride straight to the cow and then let him start walking towards the gate? You know, stuff like Bud Williams talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that was really refreshing, because this guy didn't care if he had a horse under him or not. He could get the same job done. And more times than not, to save time, he would walk his pens. And it's because he didn't have to open any gates. He was probably 50, 55 years old, and he could really move through those pens. And his cattle all knew him really well. It didn't matter if he was on a horse or if he was on foot. They knew who it was. And like I said, all of his horses were real quiet, which was probably because of the way he had learned to be with cattle. And he didn't, if I remember right, he used a mechanical hackamore, which I don't know what kind of guy.
That's kind of blasphemy for folks like you.
Absolutely. But, you know, in the back of Ed Cannell's book, you know, Ed's riding along, he's got a little hackamore horse that he's leading on his old gelding, and Ed's got a mechanical hackamore on that horse's face. And that would go back to, like I said, you know, it doesn't matter what you have on that horse's face, as long as you're using it in a manner that you're not torturing him. And and that's kind of why I'm careful on my verbiage when I'm talking about training a horse or teaching a horse. It's possible to get these things done a lot of different ways, but it does boil down to psychology. It really does.
Oh, I think so. There is no animal that is more like a human than a horse, as from what I've encountered, as just personality-wise.
Uh-huh.
You know, there's different personalities from cow to cow, but they're a lot more uniform within the bovine species than the equine. Equine is a whole different world. I mean, they are sure enough just unique to a T.
Absolutely. You know, I've been around a lot of old cows when they're calving out heifers and calving out cows, and the difference from one cow to the next is, I mean, they're night and day. Some of them, you might be 40, 50 yards off, or even 100 yards away, and they're watching you, and they're watching every move you make, and you can shoot that cow from that far away, you know.
Yep.
Maybe you've got 10 head of them wadded up in a corner, and you're kind of holding roe deer on them, and you need to sort out a few head one way and a few head the other. And some of those old cows will get, so they'll watch you from 100 yards away, and you can sort them that far away. And that's something I learned from old Gary Miller over in Oregon. They had some pretty waspy cattle, and he said, you know, just try to be real still. And he said, when they start to moving out of that bunch, he said, don't move your horse's head towards them at all, or else you'll stop them, you know. And I thought, I'm 100 yards from that cow. Is there any way that she is watching me, you know? And I'd sit there and watch her pretty quick. If that horse accidentally shifted, she'd stop. And so I kind of picked up on that. And later on, when I got to know that, I don't remember this Babcock name, his first name, but he used a lot of the same psychology that Gary used, you know. Be really quiet, kind of let things happen, and pay real close attention to what those cows are doing with their eyes and their ears, and when they turn. And granted, there's a lot of times we're working cows in close, and you can't do that. But
yep.
The more that you play with them, the more you figure out that, boy, they're a lot more sensitive than you could ever imagine. And you can get cows to do things just by simply being quiet and teach them that they can trust you. That you're not going to blow up and go crazy and start running around. And pretty quick you can handle cattle that normally would be a handful because of just what you said. You keep it quiet, you give them plenty of space, you let it be their idea.
Yep. Give a little bit of ground and you can gain a lot, especially like sorting in an alley, especially like on a Bramer cross type of cow. Oh man, if you can get your horse to just kind of flex and move back and then just show them just the slightest opening with by shifting your horse's hip over, even a couple inches. And, once that one kind of filters their way up to the front, you can just slide that hip just a little bit and she is gone. And it's almost like, you almost feel like a conductor of a symphony when you get shit to fall in place like that.
Well, go ahead.
Your hand movements are even almost like a conductor, the way, you got the reins just in your fingertips and then you're moving your feet. It's kind of fun,
Oh man. I mean, you're operating off of indirect feel the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, once in a while you might have to get right up in a cow's face, but for the most part, especially if you've worked with those cattle quite a little bit, and that's something that I don't know a lot of people understand, that you can train a cow as you're working her, just like you train a horse on the ground when you're working him. You work a horse on the ground in a round corral, doing your footwork where maybe you're trying to get him hooking on or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same with a cow. You start needing to do a job outside with her, and if she's never been around you, then she doesn't know how to react to you. But if you've taken her in the corral and you said, okay, this is what we're going to do here. I'm going to take this little set of cows and I'm going to sort them into this situation, or I'm going to part them here and I'll send one or two this way, et cetera, et cetera. All you're doing is playing with them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're learning to react to you as a stimulus, and pretty quick they understand that when he does this, I do this. And he doesn't get excited.
Yep.
He doesn't yell. He doesn't stick the dog on me for no reason at all. I guess for all intents and purposes, they understand that you're not there to hurt them.
Yep.
You're there to hurt them, but you're not there to hurt them.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
But getting that handle on a cow is just as important as getting a handle on a horse. And, I was watching a working cow horse deal, I want to say it was this morning, and there was a pretty lively cow that this guy was working. And this horse was really, really handy. And the horse overreacted. He's not the kind of horse you would have wanted in a feed yard. He was a sport horse, He was quick. He was catty. He was alley acting. I mean, he was almost jumpy. It's the kind of horse you'd be like, okay, this is too much. We need quiet.
Yeah. Yeah, you're tired of holding them back because you're in their face too much, but you still got to hold them back.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this little gelding, he worked that cow for a second and got the cow really wound up, right? And so they went and they did their work along the fence, and he fenced them a few times, and, they get to where they need to do that figure eight with those calves, and by now the calf's kind of losing his wind a little bit, and he runs that calf into a figure eight. But you could tell by the time he had turned that cow down the fence about 3-4 times and done his figure eights, pretty quick that calf was like, what do you want from me? Why won't you just leave me alone? And he started to run off. And of course it was the end of the run, and so the guy quit that calf. Now, in my way of thinking, you just made that calf a whole hell of a lot hard to handle.
Mm-hmm.
Why I thought about for a long time making working cow horses, but then I came to a realization that just like that gelding that won the high point for his fence work, that's not what you want in a horse. Yeah, it's fun to watch. Yeah, he's super athletic, and you're getting to see how big of an athlete he is. But in all actuality, if I had to deal with a gelding that every time I was going to work a cow, he started jumping this way and jumping that way and quick footing everywhere. I mean, this horse was everywhere in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it is hard for cattle to understand what you want when you're being that aggressive. You know?
Yep.
So once again, we come to the old, we're not at a rodeo, we're not at a horse race. We're trying to put pounds on these cows.
Yep.
We want them to gain weight. We want them to stay healthy. We don't need them under a bunch of duress because we want to ride a really fancy cow horse.
Yep.
So anyway, Matt, and it's been fun talking cows and horses with you.
Always a pleasure, Scott. I know I've had plenty of requests to get you back on anyway, so it was time. And I sure enjoy it.
I want you to know, after all that we've talked about, this is something that I think it's important everybody realizes, is that there's a ton of stuff to learn about these
Mm-hmm.
and I by no means know everything. I mean, I have a stockmanship handbook that I read. It is simply about cow psychology and how to handle cattle and horses better. And not just cattle and horses, it applies to goats and sheep and reindeer and elk and deer and antelope. I mean, the information goes to any animal who is a prey animal. And so these guys who are working bison, the same thing works on bison as what works on mule deer. It's just they have a different, I'm trying to think of that big bubble that animals have.
Flight zone. Flight
zone. They all have that different flight zone. And
that is one term I will never, ever in my life forget unless somebody switches my brain out with somebody else's, because I've sat through enough Temple Grandin lectures in my lifetime that I will never forget the term "put the damn hot shot down" or flight zone. That those two phrases just forever be burned into my memory.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more to that than most folks can comprehend if they haven't had to work cows for a living.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you get on some of these places that are out in the middle of nowhere and all you've got's a bunch of cantankerous young cowboys that they'd rather fight and drink than ever worry about, work.
Yeah.
But I'll guarantee you, there's a lot to be said for a man who has some knowledge about what Temple Grandin has to say and what old Bud Williams has to say,
Oh, absolutely. You get tired of hearing some of it sometimes because it's kind of in the same vein that a lot of us cowboys get tired of hearing about different clinicians, and it's not so much the clinicians themselves, it's a lot of their followers that, can repeat everything that Pat Pirelli has ever said in an arena when he's doing a clinic, but they cannot translate that to their own horse. That was right. My oldest sister is a hand with a horse. She trains a lot of hunter jumpers back in North Carolina, and she said Pat Pirelli has ruined more good horses than any man alive, and it's not so much him himself, it's his disciples that have done it. And she's got a point.
Yes.
And And but I think more than anything, Temple Grandin, a lot of her cattle working designs are just not feasible for a working, your standard commercial working operation. But she has brought so much awareness to how cattle react and behave, and well, a lot of animals, for more than just cattle. But she's made more people aware of handling methods, and that's there's a lot to be said for that.
Absolutely. And once again, it comes down to, those people who they're trying to understand what Pat Pirelli's putting across, and, they've got one or two horses.
Mm-hmm.
They've only got one or two horses to play around with, and so they're gonna make mistakes, and they're gonna screw up those horses, and now they don't have any fresh horse flesh to ruin, and that's tragedy. I mean, the only way those people are gonna keep getting better is to keep getting bucked off. And they're gonna keep having a runaway, and they're gonna keep having horses flip over because they threw the spade bit in their mouth too soon.
Yep.
That's the kind of things that you got to do to learn what not to do.
Yeah, and that's true.
I guess in a way, I'd rather see a lot of people screwing up these good horses and a lot of people making mistakes than nobody having that knowledge even available to them.
That's true. Well, and I kind of like the people that screw up their horses, because a lot of those type of people send them to me and try to make them better, and so I make a little extra money doing it, so I don't mind it that much.
You betcha. We'll have to talk about that, making money off of training horses sometime, because I used to make a little money at it, but I never did make enough to make ends meet.
Well, I haven't. I've never done it full time for exclusive type of deal, so I haven't figured that part out yet either. But I've made a little side money doing it, and that never hurts. So
yeah, you betcha. Well, hey, I probably ought to get rolling here.
All right, Scott. Well, it was good talking to you, man.
Good visiting with you too. You have yourself a good afternoon.
Hey, you too. You want to sign us off real quick?
Yes, I will. All righty, folks. Move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Have a good one.
Thank you, Matt. Bye.
Bye.
Well, there you have it, folks. The long one, but I'm sure you guys liked it. I know I did. Boy, I could talk to that guy for a long time, and as you noticed, he's pretty obliging to do so. So it's always a good time when I get to talk to him, and he sure knows his stuff about horses. A little different style than what I'm used to, but it's all good stuff. That's gonna do it for me today. This week. I hope you guys have a good weekend. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, which isn't a whole lot, but stay safe. And thanks again for tuning into the show. I do appreciate it. Thanks for all the comments, the memes and everything you guys share with me. That some of those go on the page. It's I make very few of those memes. I just steal them from somebody else. So keep sending them to me. Check out the Burning Daylight Bull Session group there on Facebook. There's a link at the pinned at the top of the Facebook page. But go find me on Facebook. I'm Matt McKinley, at MickerMac85 on Twitter and Instagram. And you can find the show page Burning Daylight on Facebook and YouTube. And at Move Your Ass on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. That's MOVEYER. And go check out my website, burning-daylight.com. Click on the Listen tab. You can listen to the show right there. There's a player right on the page, or a link to most of the major platforms that I'm on, including a link to my YouTube page. So most all of the episodes are on there. Eventually all of them will be. Just got to get around to doing it. And check out the store there. Got a couple hats for sale. We'll have some new stuff here coming up pretty shortly, trying to get that all ironed out. And other than that, just keep listening, sharing, tell your friends, tell your family, and keep growing this show. We'll get to do some more cool stuff, talk to cool people, and we'll just have some fun. But in the meantime, I got some shit to do, so I'm going to leave it there. Move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Old Mike Hernandez was a bueno vaquero, rode some good horses, California style. I watched him for hours and he showed me a little of the old California he knew for a while. Started young horses in Bosali Fiador, onto the Touraine, the old Spanish Spain. Brought them along with two hands that were gentle, some fine reining horses as ever were made. And he'd spin that pony hanging on to the riata. He hung from hereafter in the Willow Creek barn. And I watched and I wondered, man, how could it do that then? He changed direction and spin him some more, round and round and round. Had them big spurs that came from Chihuahua. They never had ever raked hide nor hair. They had a nice jingle, and when he rode by, they made pretty music that danced on the air. Lived in a shack with his wife named Juanita. She cooked on a wood stove, tortillas and beans. After we'd eaten, he said, come I show you what the word handle on a good cow horse means. And he'd spin that pony hanging on the riata. He hung from hereafter in the Willow Creek barn. And I watched and I wondered, man, how could it do that then? He'd change direction and spin him some more, round and round and round. He never did shout, he never did whisper. He had his own lingo that they understood. A touch of a knee or the lift of a rein, his horses all gave him the best that they could. In an old shed out behind his adobe, I helped him to hang up his bridles and gear. That's where I discovered an old tarp that covered 3 trophy saddles won back many years. And he'd spin that pony hanging on to the riata. He hung from hereafter in the Willow Creek barn. And I watched and I wondered, man, how could it do that then? He'd change direction and spin him some more. And he'd spin that pony hanging on to the riata. He hung from hereafter in the Willow Creek barn. And I watched and I wondered, man, how could it do that then? He'd change direction and spin him some more, round and round and round, 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 round and round and round.